The final step in the process then is for the appraiser to put together their appraisal report. But it's a very important process flow. How do we get from the appraisal to the actual appraisal report? Well, the first thing that the appraiser has to do is understand why they're being hired. They're going to want to know what the purpose of this report is. Why is that so critical? Because remember, the appraiser is responsible to anyone who could reasonably rely on their work. So they want to understand the scope, the length or the distance that this report might go, so they understand who they could potentially be responsible to. The second thing that they're going to want to know or confirm is what is the property we're talking about? What is the subject? What are we looking at here? Is it a house, a townhouse? Who owns it? How do they own it? Airspace rights, easements, all those types of things. What's very important about this is they cannot rely on what somebody else told them. They must confirm this information themselves. So they can't say, well, the seller told me this, or the buyer told me that, or the bank told me this or that. They must confirm this information themselves. So once they know why they've been hired and the subject of what their appraisal is going to be, they can choose the appropriate method, remember, based on the type of property that is going to form the basis of their appraisal. So once they know that, they can then do their work. And there's no simplicity there. There's definitely a high level of complexity, but now they can actually come up with a market value. How are they going to communicate that market value is in their appraisal report, but that appraisal report doesn't have to be a physical paper report. Appraisal reports can be legally binding if they were provided verbally or orally. So oral appraisal reports are legally binding. Much more commonly, you're going to have written appraisal reports. And if you do, it's going to fall into one of three categories. The first category is what we call a narrative. A narrative appraisal report is a very detailed report. It's more costly than other types of reports. So if you don't want to pay the cost and you don't need that level of detail, you can go to what we call a short form report. Short form, less detailed, less costly for the individual paying the bill. And finally, the third type, and perhaps the most common, is what we call a form or standard appraisal report. A form or standard is the most common, or one of the most common, because it's the one used by banks and lenders. Lenders have a lot of risk, and they want to make sure that if they're going to lend money to somebody or a business, that they have a high level of security. So getting a good, solid appraisal is part of that security. So they want to make sure that the appraiser has done some specific requirements or answered some specific questions. They're not telling the appraiser how to do their job. They're just saying, as part of your process, make sure you understand or answer these questions. So this is the very important process of going from being hired to do an appraisal review to finally preparing an appraisal report.